how do you measure what the value is? And normally the situation is that you look at the marketplace and you come up with a value by looking at the market. But for open space, of course, there is no market. And so what contingent valuation does is it takes a hypothetical market. It asks people how much they would be willing to pay to actually receive some particular good or to have some kind of amenity. So, for example, when these kind of techniques were first developed, there's a kind of classic example whereby the Department of Transport in the UK wanted to understand what the value would be, or the negative value would be, when they were starting to build, I think it was Terminal 4 or Terminal 5. And what they did was they brought people into a very dark room, and they literally opened a window and blasted the room with noise, the kind of noise that you would have if you were living in an area whereby the planes were going past. And they used that kind of technique as a kind of simulation technique to try to make people understand what it was that they were going to get and what it was, and therefore then how to ascertain from them how much it would be worth to them to not have that or to have that. And the kind of sophistication in terms of the simulation techniques that they use, really obviously depends a lot on the amount of money that's available for the study. But in the States now, I understand that some of the simulation techniques are very, very sophisticated. But I always used to quite like that one from the Department of Transport, because to me it's just so, like, you can really understand what it is that they were trying to do. Open the window and shut it, and then open the window and shut it again. So this is what contingent valuation does. It basically presents people with a number of different options and says, how much would you be willing to pay? Now, of course, contingent valuation has its critics, because, of course, you're not actually asking people to pay for something. So there are a whole range of means of trying to make sure that your contingent valuation is as robust as possible. And when I give you the example that we did for the harbour, I'll just tell you a few of the things that we tried to do. But contingent valuation is not new. It was developed in the 60s. It's now used all over the world and is a subject in its own right. There's a couple of pictures of various different books that have been written about it. The common applications now include cost-benefit analysis, demonstration of importance, priority setting, also the design of economic instruments and pricing, and legal damage assessment, which is mainly in the US. The most famous example where contingent valuation was used to examine legal damages was the Exxon Valdez oil spill back in 1989. I'm sure many of you probably remember it. The effects of the oil spill were absolutely devastating, and a contingent valuation study was done to estimate the value of preventing a similar accident. And the value that the Nobel Prize-winning economists that actually did the research came up with was 2.8 billion. And partly as a result of that study, there was an out-of-court settlement in excess of 1 billion. And contingent valuation in the US is now accepted as evidence for accessing legal damage claims. So this is just one application in the world whereby it really is used as a practical technique to really try and help put a value on some of these things that do not have a financial value. So back in 2006 we did a study for, as I said, for the Harbour Business Forum, and the study was looking at the value of Victoria Harbour. And the idea behind it was that it wasn't looking at the value of the water per se, but looking at the value of improving the planning and development of the harbour as a whole. So we weren't looking at the relationship between what if you reclaimed the whole harbour versus not having a harbour. What we were trying to do was to say, what would people be willing to pay, and what would the value be of having a much better waterfront, better interaction, much better planning and development of the harbour. So in order to undertake that analysis, we did a number of things. We had an opinion survey, focus groups. We had to develop visual stimuli, that simulation technique that I was telling you about. We conducted face-to-face interviews. We got the best people in the world, an organisation called FTech in the UK, to help advise us to make sure that we were doing everything properly, and we did 2 pilot surveys. We interviewed about 1,000 people, and each interview lasted about 20 minutes. So the kind of things we were asking them about, if you want to ask somebody what the value or what they're willing to pay for something, if you ask them straight away, then you're going to get an answer that is, you know, either miles too high or miles too low. You need to kind of warm them up. So these are the kind of things that we ask them about. We ask them about their usage, their perceptions, their ideal future, which help to develop the scenarios, and then how much were they willing to pay for it. So what we did was we developed a number of visual stimuli. Don't forget, this was on the street. This was not a very sophisticated in terms of the stimuli, but what we were trying to do was to make sure that the whole thing wasn't biased. And so what we did was we developed a number of different pictures and asked people to pick the ones that to them reflected their ideal harbour. They could have picked none, they could have picked 10, they could have picked 5. We designed the survey so that they could do that. And what we found was that the most popular activities were all the kind of things that we're talking about today in terms of a green city or cool city. That what people really wanted was recreational places, green areas, places to go and do things. And the most unpopular ones were all about building more highways, more residential and more commercial. The willingness to pay questions, we spend a lot of time in the pilot surveys and getting advice from our world experts about how to actually ask the question to make sure we got the most sensible and robust response. And so what we did was we tried to relate how much we asked people they were willing to pay to the kind of things they used to be paying on a monthly basis, like their mobile phone bill or other kind of utility bills, so that it wasn't some kind of alien concept. And the results. What we found was that, not unexpectedly, there were 24%, I think, people who said that they weren't willing to pay. But the reason why they weren't was because the primary reason why they weren't was because they felt that somebody else should pay. And so it doesn't mean to say that their willingness to pay was zero. It's just that they felt that, in economics we say it's not just revealed. We're basically saying here that 24% of people thought that the government should pay for it. But if you take the average of all the rest of, including the 24% that said nothing, then the median was 68 and the average monthly willingness to pay was 222. So without going into too many technical details, we also asked them how long they were willing to pay that for and worked out on a net present value basis what that actually meant per person. So the individual was about 12,000. Working that out, going it up to the population, you know, we made sure that our sample was relevant to the population, and this comes to a value of 73 billion Hong Kong dollars. This was back in 2006, and it's in net present value terms. Just putting it in context, I'm told I don't have long to go, so just some examples of how does that 73 billion relate to government spending, other assets. So the key message from the study was that whilst we're the world's most efficient economy, we're only 70th on quality of life. People do want a harbour that features green spaces, recreational areas and promenades, and it doesn't really matter whether it was 90 billion, 60 billion or 200 billion. People value it and they're willing to pay for it. And the kind of value we were coming up with was very high and we felt couldn't be ignored. So just looking back to the topic I was asked to talk about today, contingent valuation moving forward, and just using this example of the harbour. And contingent valuation could be used in many, many different contexts, and open space, of course, is just one of those. So contingent valuation, from our perspective, does help to give powerful evidence of the need for public policy change. How else could it be used? It could be used to help provide a business case for parks and recreational areas. It could be used as a technique for better public policy decision making, rather than everything being based on a financial value, that this adds some economics and some assessment of what the community not only needs and wants, but what they're actually willing to pay for it, what its value is to them. And our conclusion from our study was that the Better Harbour was affordable, and at the time a very key person had gone up and said that we couldn't afford more parks, And our evaluation said actually you can afford more parks because people are willing to pay for them. And just to bring it all back in terms of the economic perspective, we feel that realising the potential in terms of not only infrastructure and all the other aspects that generate economic value, that open space, a good living environment, also creates economic